I would say that a very, very large number of designers will suddenly find themselves out of work.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing
Yeah.
this. I think we reached peak designer in 2020. I think 2020, 21, there was a massive hiring boom, and it was really hard to find designers. I think now a lot of people I talk to, sadly, like, are struggling. A lot of people who would have got a job immediately, they would have been fired on a Friday and had a job on a Monday, are now taking 6 months or a year to find their next job.
Andy, I'm really excited. Like, I am actually really excited to talk to you. You've actually been quite a big part of my journey at various points, and we've crossed paths at different points. And I was trying to think about how to introduce you, and I know that
Mhm.
everybody hates these bios and all this. And you actually said that on one of your talks. You said, "Oh, I hate the old bio." But I did a quick flash. I was like, I think I could. The roles that I've understood that you've
Mhm.
encompassed is designer, author,
Mhm.
founder,
Mhm.
speaker, mentor, investor, pilot,
Mhm.
diver, and shark wrangler. Did I miss
Yeah,
anything?
that's some of them. I mean, I'm sure there's lots more, but that's probably
Yeah.
enough to be going with, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder if perhaps you can ground this for people that maybe haven't come across your work. Like, how would somebody understand you? Like, if they haven't met you before, how would you sort of explain a little bit of your origin story?
Great. I mean, again, I can talk at length for this, so I'll try not to go too
Yeah,
long, but I guess basically it comes from a childhood of just being interested in the stuff, interested in the world. I was brought up as a kid who would read books about science and nature and engineering. And I was that typical kind of geeky kid that wanted to play with Lego and Meccano and kind of build things and understand how the world worked. I was really lucky that I had parents that would take me around to museums and art galleries and ask me sort of difficult questions. And so I guess when the internet sort of emerged, that was a great place. Two things. First of all, to find answers. Back in the early days, you could just go and literally surf the internet from link to link to link. This was before the days of Google, when you had a functional search engine, and you just get lost in this kind of like beautiful array of knowledge. And so I started being a web person as a user and kind of fell in love with it. And I also quite like the ethos, I guess, when I was kind of getting into the web. Um, I guess I've always been a little bit more kind of sort of left leaning. I've been a little bit more kind of believing in I don't know, human potential and the ability for communication to help solve a whole bunch of problems around the world. I think later on it's also been clear that that's caused maybe more problems than it solved. But I think in the early days, I was a real believer in the ability of the web to kind of make connect people and make life more interesting and better. And so my origin story in terms of getting into the web was twofold. So I was sat in a internet cafe in Sulawesi in Indonesia while I was traveling around Asia. And I was sat there doing my Hotmail. And there was a guy next to me who wasn't doing Hotmail. And this was really weird because everyone else was on Hotmail emailing. And this person had this screen and it was all black and green and there were all these like weird angle brackets and curly braces. And I was like, what the hell is that person doing? And so when he got up to step away and finish his session, I kind of summoned up the courage. Just like, excuse me, what were you doing there? You weren't doing Hotmail. And he's like, oh, I'm making a website. And I know this sounds really stupid, but prior to that point, I didn't think a website was something you could make. I didn't think it was something I could make. I assumed it happened in a computer science lab in a big company in a basement somewhere with big servers, and
yeah,
it was a
yeah.
a team sport.
Dark
And I
arts.
suddenly,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. It felt like it was something that other people did. And this
yeah,
person kind of just really exposed me to this idea that, hey, look, I'm traveling around Indonesia. Rather than emailing all of my friends, I've built this website. This was before the term blog had appeared. And, uploading my photos, I get them scanned, I put them online and I can tell people. And so I thought, well, that sounds like a really good fun thing to do. I want to learn how to do this. And then the second thing that got me into the web was I was sat in a hostel in Singapore, chatting to this guy, and was like, at the time I was a diving instructor. I was traveling around the world. It wasn't my career, but I traveled. This is where the shark diver comes in. I would work on
yeah.
liveaboard boats. I would travel around Indonesia and Thailand and Australia. I'd work for 3 or 4 months. I'd get some amazing diving in. I'd go somewhere else. I'd work for 3 or 4 months. I was kind of, it was like being, I guess, a ski instructor, but in Bermuda shorts rather than earmuffs. and it was really, really good fun. So I was chatting to this guy going like, what do you do? And he's like, I'm a web designer. What's that? And he's like, well, I know this thing called HTML. It's really easy. Any idiot can learn it within a couple of months. And I will work for 6 months of the year. It's really, really well paid. And I'll travel for 6 months. And I thought, hell, that sounds pretty impressive. Like that sounds really, really good. Up to that point, like I'd always been a computer person. Like I had the first Spectrum at school. When everyone else was running around outside, kind of like playing rugby or football or whatever, I'd be inside on a BBC Basic with a couple of other nerds, kind of making
Yeah,
a
yeah.
little kind of like turtle plotter go, move around. Like I was that kind of canonical kid from Stranger Things. So
Yeah, yeah,
so I'd always been interested in tech, and so I discovered this thing called web design. And so when I came back off my trip, like last trip in '99, I thought I'm going to teach myself web design. So I bought a cheap £200 Pentium 286. I would sit in my local Borders coffee shop and I would read all the books around kind of like web design, which was really quite new then. And basically somehow managed to get myself a web design and development job. Now, back in the day, you had to do everything. So you had to do, you know, you had to do front end, you had to do back end, you had to do visual design. And so I'm one of that generation of like, kind of like, kind of potterers. I've done my
yeah,
fair share of MySQL and PHP and HTML. I wrote one of the first ever books on CSS, which you may remember back in the day,
yeah,
CSS
yeah.
Mastery. But that was a time when you could just be a bit of a nerd and you could do everything. And then over the years, I got really interested in design. I got really interested in user experience. And so the first framing is like I'm a web geek and I'm a potterer and I'm a noodler. But when I discovered design, I realized that there was something really interesting here. That it was maybe undervalued. It was maybe not being utilized in the best way possible.
This is like
That's
early 2000s, isn't it? Like
yeah,
that's like, yeah,
abs
yeah,
99 2000, just around the kind of the first kind of dot-com crash. But I discovered a thing called user experience design, which was all about trying to take a more scientific approach to solving websites. Prior to that, it was graphic design. You'd open up Photoshop or these days Figma, you'd make
yeah.
something look pretty. And I love the idea of like, well, what if we talk to our customers? What if we didn't just talk to them? What if we created like a prototype, a little bit like a kind of like a scale model that an architect might use? What if we watched them using the thing and saw where they struggled? Because this was back in the day when the web was really new, and so I love that. And so I
Can I just ask, like,
yeah,
that no one was doing that then? Like, because I was, I'm marginally younger than you, but I was down there in 2002, 2003. I don't remember people prototyping.
no,
Like,
no.
where did that come from? Like,
Um, well, I mean, to lean into that being the first, I mean, I founded arguably the UK's first UX agency. And
yeah,
so Clearleft, which is the agency I ran for 15 years. And so you're absolutely right. Prior to that, there wasn't any other company that was kind of practicing UX, arguably. Now, there were companies that would position themselves as usability engineering companies. And they would go out and they would do some of the testing, but they would never be doing the design work. They would just be getting, prototypes and testing them on users. There were also kind of information architecture companies that were kind of like figuring out the structure of websites, and some of the information architecture people were doing a little bit of kind of wireframing and prototyping. But very few people had really brought all that practice together. And so I guess, as I said at the start, like I would start kind of, find like, reading websites, there were, early people blogging about some of this stuff. And I basically pulled my own practice together that was a bit of usability, a bit of Don Norman stuff, a bit of AI polar bear book stuff, a bit of visual design, a bit of interaction design from the Flash people, and effectively, arguably, helped sort of not create UX design, but definitely introduce it to the UK. And so that was my background, like seeing this thing and just seeing how frustrating technology could be. The whole old argument of like, your parents struggling to use the remote, or rushing to try and buy a train ticket and you end up buying the most expensive thing because it's badly designed. And I thought, like, I'm not going to be able to solve cancer. I'm not going to be able to, um, you know, create global peace or solve world hunger. But if I can make everybody's day-to-day interactions just a little bit better, a little bit less frustrating, a little bit annoying, then I would have found a kind of a mission in life. And so that's the other strand, is like going from a noodler and an explorer in an emerging technology into somebody that kind of lands in this space of design and thinking, okay, great, I can help bring more good design into people's lives, and by doing so, make the world a little bit better.
Interesting. And at what point in, because you mentioned Clearleft, like where does Rich and Jeremy arrive here? Like, what? Because I was thinking about this, and for those that don't know, Richard and Jeremy are the co-founders of Clearleft, right? And
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. You guys are a very interesting mix because you're really different, and I just found that really curious. Like, how you guys meet? How did that beginning inception happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, and I think that was one of our early superpowers. I meet a lot of people that go into business with their best friends, and their best friends are often people who are exactly like them, and that often means that they're really good at doing the same things, and they really hate doing the same things. And that wasn't the case with me, Rich, and Jeremy. Like, we knew each other from the internet. So the backstory basically is, I created the third ever website in the UK, possibly Europe, that used CSS to design the site. Before that, you used to have table-based layout, and then along comes IE 5.2 for Mac, and that was the first browser that allowed you to actually use CSS for the whole design. Before, you could maybe make a change of link color, or you could do really little things, but that basically allowed you to use floats and stuff to lay out pages. And so I built my own blog, and it turned out mine was the third ever website in the UK to do this. Um, I discovered that the person that had built the second ever website, they'd launched it maybe like a week or two before me, was this guy called Jeremy Keith. And it just so happened he was living in the same town as me. And so as I was kind of trying to hack my website together, I'd meet this other person who'd done this, and I'd ask him questions. Hey, how did you do X? How did you do Y? How did you do Z? And so we kind of build up a little bit of a friendship there. Um, and then, so me and Jeremy were kind of vibing over CSS. HTML was still quite new at the stage. I mean, it seems really hard to believe now, but people were still learning HTML. And there were two people on the internet who were really well known for teaching people how to use HTML. There were these two websites. There's this one website called Ask Dr. Web by this young developer called Jeffrey Zeldman, and he had a whole bunch of tutorials around how to do HTML. And there was another guy called Rich who had this website called Sizzling HTML Jalfrazy, and he would post tutorials about how to do HTML.
Love it.
And it just turned out that this guy also was living in Brighton. His name was
Yeah.
Rich Rutter. So there was a really active mailing list called the B&M Brighton New Media mailing list. And both Rich and Jeremy were on this list, and we'd chat and we'd kind of email back and forth and help each other solve problems, and occasionally go to the pub together and kind of got to know each other.
Mm.
And then, and
So this started with like kind of common interest, and it wasn't like, hey, let's make a company. Like that came a little bit later. It was more like you're just sort of drawn together out of shared interest, really. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, the web design was a kind of a niche interest. I mean, it was almost like citizen band radio. Like, not many
Yeah.
people did it. Like, you wouldn't have whole
Yeah.
teams of people in a company. You might have one person who was sat on their own, a little bit unloved. They didn't have anyone to talk to. And so you would read people's blogs. You would go on mailing lists and newsletters. And so there was this whole kind of blogosphere that emerged. And it just turned out that, like, I had one of the best, like, I had one of the top 50 visited blogs in the UK. So did Jeremy, so did Rich, so did a guy called Tom Coates, and a few other people who you may or may not know, that sort of formed this little kind of group of British web designers that for a while just would meet up together. We'd go away and have weekends away in the countryside, and we called ourselves the Brit Pack. It was kind of sort of
Really?
jokingly a kind of a joke at the kind of the Brat Pack in
Yeah,
America, the
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
movie people. And so there was this crowd of about 20 people that had websites and would just hang out together. We found out that there was this cool conference happening in Austin called South by Southwest. One of our group, a guy called Ian, had been the previous year and said it was amazing. And so about 20 or 30 British people went out in 2005 to go to speak at South by Southwest. And I spoke, and Jeremy spoke, and Rich spoke. And back then, South by Southwest was, for us, it was huge. It was 2,000 people. There were like 4 different tracks on at the same time. It was overwhelming. But basically, we went there, and everybody whose blogs we followed, Jeffrey Zeldman, Dan Cederholm,
The
Doug
who's who.
Bowman, the who's who of web back then was kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
there. And so we
yeah.
kind of got to meet all these people. And so,
Interesting.
there was probably a crowd of about 100 people who were just like hanging out together and, having cocktails and going for Mexican food and getting to know each other. And so they're all fermented. And basically, you know, I can go into more detail about how Clearleft started, but sort of the seeds were sort of set at South by Southwest.
Interesting. Did it feel at that time that there was a sort of, I always think of it as like a wave, because you kind of get waves of something new, and obviously there was the 90s wave that you kind of just on the back of, and then you're kind of in the noughties wave of this new, era of design and stuff. Did it feel like that? Or were you just kind of going with it and it emerged, or did you kind of sense that something was going to come out of this?
I mean, you never know where things are going to go, but I guess I've been very lucky that throughout my career, like I've got a book at the moment called The Growth Equation. And in the book, I talk about kind of like startup growth, and it's a series of S curves. And ideally, when one S curve kind of peters out, you find another one. And I think the same is
Yeah,
true of trends. There are people
yeah,
who have been on a single trend in their life, and that's been the only trend they've ever had. And now they're in their 50s or 60s or whatever, and they're feeling sanguine and sad about the fact they've only had one trend. I feel that I've been quite lucky, particularly when it comes to the internet, where I've surfed 3 or 4 different trends, and I'm on a
yeah.
slightly different trend now. But I've been quite good at like seeing trends, picking them up, and kind of leaning into them. And that was definitely a trend that was happening at the moment. And and I'm not saying it was because of any skill. I think I was just like I had the right, I had the right attitude, but I was in the right place at the right time, right point in my career.
Your eyes were
Um,
open, weren't they? You
yeah,
obviously,
yeah,
because someone else might have seen those signals and not interpreted it that way, but your eyes
yeah,
were obviously open and you saw something. Because
yeah.
I just
But it
find
was
that,
also luck. Yeah, it was.
yeah,
I mean, like I had a few people, like again, Jeffrey Zellman, who's become a friend now. After Ask Dr. Webb, he started a List Apart, which became like the main site for people who believed in web standards, HTML, CSS, kind of. There was a big battle brewing, between different browsers, the browser wars,
yeah,
and
yeah,
also between whether the web would be web standards or whether it would be Flash. And in the end, web standards won out, and so there was this kind of community, and sort of arguably Jeffrey Zeldman was the sort of the parent or grandparent of that community. And when he saw my CSS blog, like he posted about it, and suddenly I got thousands, tens of thousands of followers. I posted a I don't think it was one of the first, but like, there's this site called the CSS Zen Garden where people
I
would
remember
take
that.
the same, yeah, they'd take the same
Yeah,
HTML and the same content and they'd make a
spin it.
fundamentally different design. And I think my design was like number 20. So it wasn't the first one, but there's been hundreds and hundreds since. And so
Mm.
I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, did things out of fun that ended up getting prominence and getting attention. So yeah, a mix of luck and a little bit of sort of kind of
But
interest and skill, I
I
guess.
think, I think, but hearing that time that you're talking about of like, to common interests, sort of, geeky, nerdy people interested in the web, um, it, I can kind of see the almost like the residue of that, if you like, when because I have a sort of strange space here as someone talking to you, because we've met in
Mm,
very different guises. You were a client, I was working for you, or rather I was your client, and then I was working for you for a little bit, and like one thing I really remember, particularly working, I was only a lefty for 5-6 months, but there was something when we went for lunch. I went for lunch with various people, and it was really different to what I've experienced going for lunch in any other organization I've been in. Normally, when I go for lunch in other organizations, we talk about trash, what's on the TV, soap, or whatever. I go for lunch at Clearleft, and people, it feels like a kind of like, I want to say intellectual, but I don't mean in any
mm,
kind of snobby way. In a very like
mm.
open way. It was a kind of like a learning culture. People would just be kind of spontaneously sharing um, really interesting information that I'd never heard before, and that was
Yeah.
quite kind of unique. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just sharing with you something that everybody probably knows. It was very like a curious sharing culture, and I'm guessing what I've just heard now, that must have permeated from the genesis of how you guys met. So there was something in there, that in the culture.
Well, I mean, we were part of a scene and we helped create a scene. So yeah, we were part of a scene that was global, and we helped give that global scene in the UK some kind of sense of space. You know, Brighton became quite a hotbed of people who are interested in technology, interested in design, and not just interested in it for making money or a career, but kind of intellectually. And as I said at the start of the show, kind of, I guess, sort of ethically, kind of philosophically, etc., etc. So, um, and so, you know, being part of the scene is really good fun. A lot of people would come and work with Clearleft, not because it was a job necessarily, but because, you know, and they could probably have got more money elsewhere, but they wanted to be around a bunch of really, really smart people that would have those conversations. You know, you'd be willing to kind of like forgo an extra 10 or 15K that you might get working in a big agency to come and work in a little tiny agency, but you were surrounded by people who were writing books, who were writing blog posts, who were speaking at conferences, who were shaping that scene. And so, it was a little bit like, not wanting to kind of over-grandize myself, but I imagine it would be a little bit like, being an impressionist painter in France, in the whenever the impressionists were kind of like, late 1800s, early 1900s, or being part of the punk scene, or being part of,
Yeah,
kind of the New York funk scene or whatever. Like, there's a small group of people who are kind of doing lots of really interesting stuff. And so people gravitated towards us, and that's how
yeah,
we could run conferences and events and hire really smart people. And you're absolutely right. Like the the time we spent together was, it was very intellectually sort of stimulating. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
yeah. Fun, and there was another flavor of it that was I was reflecting on. So this is my experience, right? And it's quite fun to tell you this. So when I think so, I worked with a big on a big fashion retailer with you guys, and on a contract, and I just come
Hmm.
out of working perm. I've been
Yeah.
a permie for 5 years or whatever, and so it's a different speed. And
Yeah. Was this?
I come,
I don't mind talking about kind of brands now because it's been ages
yeah,
ago
we
and I
can
won't
do
get into
that.
trouble.
Yeah,
But was this Burberry?
it was Burberry. Yeah, I was working
Yeah,
with Burberry,
gotcha.
and I just come out of John Lewis, and
Mm.
I remember like my first week or so, and I come in. And I'm thinking, it's Clearleft, whew, okay, right. And I come in and I get into the office and I'm looking around and I'm going, right, are we gonna kick off? And they're going, oh, you done it? Yeah, okay, yeah. Do you want a coffee? Yeah, I'll get a coffee, and I'm thinking it's 9:30, and then yeah, just take a seat. Okay, you know, waiting about 10 o'clock. Yeah, okay, let's just gather in the main hall. We'll have a chat. And we get in there and then we talk. And we talk for like 2 hours. This is me and the rest of the team. And we talk about everything, like with the project, all the different angles, the concerns. And I'm slightly thinking in my head, when are we going to start working? Like, and this is naive Danny, 2016. So, and I'm thinking like, shouldn't we be doing some work or something? And then after that 2 hour conversation, we had so much alignment that then it was like
Mm.
heads down, hard focus. And that
Yep.
was the
Yep.
routine that we followed more or less for most of the 5 months. It was sort of hyper discussion, alignment, and then super concentration, super focused work that was very, very clear. I knew exactly what I was doing, and it wasn't, I didn't have to redo anything. It was very kind of, and I'd never worked like that. I kind of called it like like hyper lean to people. I was just
Yeah.
like, in enterprise, that would be you put in a meeting, you have to wait a week
Yeah.
for the meeting, and it was just a very different speed and a very different way of working than I'd experienced. I don't know if that surprises you or if that's what you had understood was going on.
I mean, it's delightful to hear. I mean, as an agency, we needed to be incredibly efficient. But you also need to be incredibly clear because, this is almost the fundamentals of the agile process, but a lot of it's been lost is, like you need to be on the same page. You need to be all pulling in the same direction. And so
Yeah.
spending a bit of time up front to get alignment isn't waste. It's really, really sensible because as you said, then, you have that 2 hours of kind of everyone on the same page. And then for the rest of the day or maybe the rest of the week, you can just focus and focus and focus and get stuff done and be really, really efficient. And, and so, yeah, that cadence was definitely, I think we were a very, very different agency that wanted to do stuff really well to really, really high quality. And we tried to shape the culture around that. And we wanted to hire people. Like, again, I think a lot of freelancers found it really weird coming to our agency because they were used to be treated other. They were used to be treated like we're all going to go into our kind of company meeting now and you've got to sit outside because we're
Yeah,
paying you by
totally.
the hour and you're not
Yeah,
invited. And for
yeah,
us, like everyone was part of the team. Of course,
yeah,
you're going to come to, if we have a visiting designer coming in, you're going to come and sit in for an hour and listen to them talk about their process.
yeah, yeah.
Of
That
course, you're
happened.
going to
Yeah,
invite you
yeah,
into kind of pitches. Of course, we're going to invite you into dinner. We would often kind of do like, trips up to London. Like, we're not going to sort of make you be the only person staying in Brighton and being on your own.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you're part of the team,
yeah,
and that
yeah,
created a huge amount of trust. I think it created a huge amount of respect. I think people really, really wanted to work with Clearleft. I think our brand, I mean, still to this day, it amazes me. Like, the company's 20 years old. I left about 5 years ago, so I haven't really had much involvement recently. But if you do a search on ChatGPT for the top UX agencies in the world, Clearleft will still come up for a lot of people as like one of the top agencies. So we have a history and a heritage and an impact, which is much bigger than our small size. We were a 30, 40 person company, but we worked with Burberry, we worked with John Lewis, we worked with Virgin Atlantic, we worked with, you know, pretty much all of the kind of the major brands in the UK. And we weren't a big London agency that had 200 staff members. We were
yeah. Exactly.
30
Intentionally
geeky designers in Brighton.
by design, right? Because you could have
Yeah,
gone that way.
yeah.
What I'm just curious because we talk a lot about the knowns and the facts, and where is like your feelings in some of this? Like, you're proud. I sense you feel pride about it. Is that fair? And is that how? What's your emotional relationship with it
Um,
at
I
time?
guess so. I think pride is a challenging emotion because it can be quite negative. A lot of people can be, pride becomes before fall, all that kind of stuff. Like false pride, etc., etc. So it's not something on a day-to-day basis. I think, oh, I'm really proud of this. Like, and actually, I think that also means you're looking backwards. I think, a lot of people like they have a heyday. I talked about the kind of S curves. If you were kind of a cool musician in the 60s and then it all went wrong in the 70s or 80s, you spend your whole life looking backwards. And so that's not me. Like, I'm like, I think we had a big impact. I think we did really good work. I really value the friendships and the connections that I made. I think a lot of people see Clearleft as being a small part of their journey into this profession
Yeah,
and the professionalization of that. And so,
yeah,
of course, I'm going to be really pleased that we had that impact. I did. One of the reasons we wanted to run an agency is because we wanted to do things differently. I'd worked in agencies before, but I didn't necessarily like their culture. I didn't necessarily like the way they build or the way they interact with clients or the way they would push things out that were kind of low quality just to make a buck or just do things to serve the client. Like, we would often have quite difficult conversations with our clients. Like, we weren't the easiest people to work with because clients would say to us, we want you to do X. And we'd be like, is that the best thing? But we were almost like doctors. Like, if someone says, like, if you say to someone, you need to stop smoking or something's going to be problematic, like,
yeah,
if they go, well, I'm going to keep smoking anyway, like, you have a moral duty to try and help them. And so
I,
we would try our best to kind of steer clients in the right direction. And
mm,
we would choose not to work with clients or finish engagements if we were unable to deliver the value. Because, like, why not go with someone cheaper and less difficult to work with if
yeah.
all you want is something that's kind of a little bit kind of, me too and substandard?
I
Like,
think
you come to someone like Clearleft for excellence.
yeah, because I think something that I've come to sort of appreciate as a designer, is that one of the things to do good design, you have to create the good conditions, the right conditions
Mm,
to do design, and you're
yeah.
doing that in your relationship with your client. I have done that to some extent, within an enterprise environment, or and to a lesser extent, as a freelancer, when I'm
Mm.
going into a gig, I'm sort of saying, well, I can't work for you unless we do it this way. And otherwise maybe work with someone else. So I'm modeling some of that as well, because I feel like that's one of the most important things that a designer can do is try to create the right conditions to do good design in before they actually do
I,
the good design.
And just to be clear, it's not easy. So
No.
we were in a really fortunate position. Like we had built a following, we had built a reputation. And so that meant we had quite a lot of inbound interest. Like we never were in a position where we could pick and choose our clients. We couldn't just go to a big client and say, hey, look, client, you should work with us. And they go, yes, of course, we'd like to work with you. But what we deliberately did is we kept small. We were a 30-person team. And what that meant was like we had more people coming and wanting to work with us than we could service. Now, maybe a slightly smarter business mind would have said, well, great, well, let's triple our team size. If we've got 3 times the amount of work coming in, we should hire 3 times the amount of people. And we could have become a 100-person company. But having more people wanting to work with us than we could support actually allowed us to pick one of those 3 companies. If 3 people come to us and we can only service one, we can
Yeah.
say, well, of the 3 companies, this one is the one that we're going to be most aligned with. This is the one we're going to get on with the best. This is the one that's actually going to allow us to kind of really, really do great work. And so that was a privilege. We were really lucky. Like
Mm.
if you only have, enough work coming in to kind of like pay your mortgage, you don't have the opportunity to kind of pick and choose. And so because of our branding, because of our positioning, we were in a slightly more sort of equitable position. I wouldn't say we were ever more powerful than the client, but we were more on an even keel. If you're
Mm.
afraid that the client will leave and you'll have a massive hole in your bank balance for the next 3 months, you will behave in a way that is more to
Scarcity
please the
mindset.
client. Yeah, exactly. But that means that maybe you're going to be forced to do things that maybe are outside your comfort zone or whatever. And look, like I say, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. We've all got to make coin. We've all got to make, money and pay for mortgages and what have you. So that's not a judgment call at all. It was just, I guess it was part of our structural positioning that we wanted to have to not grow. Because again, like I said, I've worked with companies, a lot of people that have come from agencies to work with Clearleft were really appreciative, because a lot of the big agencies, they'd have 5 or 6 amazing projects a year. We'd have 5 or 6 amazing projects a year as well. But what they didn't show was a 20 or 30 awful projects that everyone was embarrassed about, that never went into the case
Yeah.
studies. People just spitting out awful banner ads or low quality Me Too sites. And that was what they were doing to make money. And we
Mm.
just didn't have
Mm.
to do any of that. And so literally every single project we did was a project that we would have been happy putting in our case study. And I think
Yeah.
that was quite a good filtering mechanism. If we're not proud to talk about this, then we probably shouldn't take it on.
Well, hearing you say that, there's something a quote from you that I saw you say once. I did a bit of homework, and you said that you started the design. I think the leading design community because you said that you were failing. And hearing everything you're saying, I
Hmm.
don't hear that, and I'm wondering what did you mean by that? If you can remember.
I mean, I can't remember that, but I'll explain why
And
why
for
that
those that
might have
don't
come about.
know, the leading design community, well, perhaps you want to describe it just for those that don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll step back a bit and maybe explain 2 angles of where that might come from. So first of all, like I maybe even step a little bit back further. So one of the great things about being a designer and working at Clearleft was we could do 6 or 7 amazing projects a year. But 6 or 7 amazing projects a year isn't much, even if you're working for really, really big companies. So we started running conferences, and the benefit of conferences, both running them and speaking at them, is you can introduce ideas and concepts to many, many more people. So we ran dConstruct, which was arguably the first digital design conference in the UK, ran for 10 years. And the idea is that if we could inspire 500 people in the room to go out and make better work, then we'd have a multiplying effect. Each year at dConstruct would do a different theme. And one year, I think it was 2009, we did a theme on UX, and it was really, really popular. So we spun that into a separate conference called UX London. And UX London is still going today, running for about 15 years or more. And that was really a community for all of the kind of the new UX people. In 2009, UX was still quite new, but it was quickly becoming like the hottest job title.
Yeah.
So we jumped on that bandwagon, we rode that S curve, we got our community together. And for a while, that was really, really, going well. But over the years, the people that used to come to UX London stopped coming. And it was always a bit of a shame because like it was a highlight of the kind of the social calendar that I get to see all of my friends.
Yeah.
And they stopped coming. And then when I kind of asked them why, they're like, well, we still love UX London, but now, I'm a leader of a team. And so I don't really get as much value out of the conference. And also I want all of my young designers to come along. And so I'll send my designers. And so the seed of the idea came, well, look, if there's a group of people who we really like and want to connect with and want to stay friends with, if they're not being served by UX London, maybe we could create a new conference called Leading Design, and they'd come to that. And so that's how the Leading Design Conference came about. It was a conference again, London, New York, San Francisco, where design leaders from all the big tech companies would gather, and then we'd look at kind of some of the challenges of being a leader. Um, Now, I, had gone from running a 2-person agency to a 10-person agency to a 30-person agency. I didn't have any coaching. I didn't really have any mentors. And so I was kind of making this stuff up as I was going along. And, I think I was probably a pretty good leader, but I probably wasn't the best leader in the world. I actually wrote an article called The Accidental Design Leader. So a talk. If you do a search for Andy Budd Accidental Design Leader, it's still up to date, even though it was about 10 years ago. And a lot of my coaching clients today find me because they saw that talk and it really resonated with them. It resonated
You
with this
talked
sense
about
of,
being a servant leader
yeah,
in that
exactly.
talk.
About being a
Yeah.
servant leader, about kind of feeling maybe an imposter syndrome a little bit, about kind of having responsibility for a team of 30 or 40 people and their happiness and their well-being and their mortgage and their personal and professional development. And all of that stuff was quite difficult. And no one taught me how to be a leader. No one taught me how to do this well. There weren't courses back then. There weren't coaches back then. And so, like, I think there's always going to be, if you're really egotistical, you'll think you're just bossing it, and that's great for you. I think I've always been somebody that wants to do better. All of my interest, like, getting into UX design, getting into the web, has always been about kind of being good enough, but wanting to improve. My hobbies, flying planes, scuba diving, I'm learning to play the drums at the moment. They all revolve around this sense of getting better and better. And so I wanted to surround myself with people who were really great leaders. And so I got to invite some of the best leaders of some of the biggest teams along to Leading Design. And I got to build a community of 2,000 heads, directors, and VPs of design. And so, like, if I wanted to be a better design leader, what better way to do that than to learn from some of the best people in the industry? So I had like the inside track, and I could do a much better job of doing that. And so that's probably where that kind of sort of comment came from around sort of failing. It's probably not failing, but it's kind of a realization that I could be performing better than I am and wanting to lean into that discomfort, always wanting to lean into discomfort rather than hiding away from it.
Does that, I mean, because that mindset of like always wanting to improve and having to go through phases where you didn't know what you were doing and you're kind of making up as you go along. I mean, did that have an effect on your mental health at any point? Are you like hard on yourself at various points, or are you forgiving? Like, how would you describe that
No,
ride?
I'm very, I'm a, I mean, maybe some of the people I've worked with in the past would disagree, but I think I'm a relatively chilled out person. I don't beat myself up. I don't come home at night and I'm overly critical and can't sleep and what have you. Like, learning, being bad at something is natural. I don't have this big ego that I think I should be amazing at everything. But I know that there's a certain skill involved, but there's also a certain level of perseverance. I mean, again, the learning to fly is a classic example. Like when I left Clearleft about 5 years ago, um, I wanted to do something that was throwing me outside my comfort zone, that was difficult and challenging, that had a bit of technical stuff because I kind of the web standards and stuff is technical, but that I could suck at because actually having run, like, Clearleft was quite well regarded. I mean, we run Best Agency of the Year like several times in a row, like globally, not just in the UK.
Yeah.
And so it'd be really easy to have a big head and say, like, because I was great at doing this, I would naturally be great at doing everything. And I knew that would be the case. And so I wanted to throw myself into a situation where I was really shit at something. And flying was a good example. Like, you know, trying to land a plane is really, really difficult. And every time you do it and you do it badly, you kind of, there is an element of go like, oh God, that sucked. But it never became defeatist. I'm not a defeatist kind of person because it's just a skill you can learn. And whether it takes you, you know, 10 attempts to land or, you know, to get your landing right or 20 or whatever, like as long as you're feeling that each time you do it, you're getting a little bit better. You know, I have confidence in my ability to figure this stuff out. I don't know how long it will take. And I don't know if, you know, my landings still are not like as smooth as butter.
Yeah.
They're very, very safe. You should come
Oh,
flying
really?
with me at some stage. Very, very safe. I'm a very safety conscious pilot. But you know, it takes kind of constant learning and practice. But that I find that really rewarding. It doesn't upset me. I don't know why it would. It actually it makes me feel alive because, you know, why wouldn't you want to learn new skills and get better at doing stuff? And so yeah,
But
it's never been
there's
a problem.
there's a thread here that I keep hearing, and you can tell me if
Mhm,
I'm way off the mark here, but you keep describing when you start a new chapter, be it, you know,
mhm,
back in Brighton, or even back in when you're backpacking, where you have this
mm,
sort of, I don't know if this is what you actually had at the time or if you're kind of overdubbing it in reverse kind of thing, but you kind of go, I knew I wanted to do this, so I went in this direction. And it's like
mm.
you seem to have these points where you have this reflection about what you need, what's happening in around you, and then where you need to go and what direction you need to go in. And that isn't common. I
Okay,
would argue.
okay.
I haven't
I
heard a
mean,
lot of people being able to do that so many times in different
yeah.
situations. I find that quite interesting
Well, well,
as
that's
a
good to hear. I mean,
behavior.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess I think a lot of the time people overthink the future and they are trying to decide between multiple paths and can't make a decision and get stuck. And then that being stuck kind of sends them into a spiral. Like, this is going to sound like really weird, but like, I grew up on a diet of choose your own fantasy adventures
Yeah,
where
mm,
every page you would get a dilemma and you'd have to choose between one option or another. You know, it's
yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
computer gaming, really. And so I don't think like being stuck and trying to intellectually figure out what the right path would be, I think is impossible. I think you've just got to go down one of the paths. And if it's the wrong path, that's fine. You can back up, you know, you can turn the corner of the book over and you can go back, you know. So none of these things are kind of um forever. And I think, you know, I think partly it's because, you know, like I think I was quite lucky. I was born in a time where I could go to university, didn't have a ton of debt, you know, I could go and try a bunch of different things. I could travel around the world and I could be a dive instructor. I could work in a whole range of different companies. So I've got, I mean, I think I got a blog post somewhere on my blog about 30 companies 30 things I did for work before the age of 30. Like, you know, I've had to go in and do randomly different things. And so you get just really good at being flexible. I mean, this is what being an agency is like. Like being an agency is you go into a new company, you go into a fintech company or an aerospace company or an AI company. And you very quickly have to get comfortable to get up to speed. You've
yeah,
also got to
yeah,
be quite comfortable asking stupid questions, people thinking you're not the expert. And so
yeah,
I guess that agency space felt really, really natural. And so yeah, I mean, like, you know, I don't see any big drama around yeah, like having that kind of neuroplasticity of trying new
yeah,
things and being comfortable of not sucking. But also, I think it's good for your mental health. I mean, this is why I'm learning to play the drums at the moment. Like,
yeah,
and I'm sucking at it, but I'm
yeah.
fine um,
I've been
because it's good for your
I
brain health.
I've been learning the piano actually, in that
Wow.
spirit. Yeah, because I've got a because I've got a young son, so I don't get very much time, like blocks of time. I get pockets of
Mm,
time. And so I was just like, I need something that I can pick up and put down. And so in a similar vein, I was like, I always wanted to learn the piano. so,
yeah.
so yeah, I bought a piano and similar to you, like I didn't mind. I wasn't afraid to be awful on it or anything like that. Turns out the piano is actually quite easy to play.
Yeah.
I feel
Well, it
like it's a
turns
bit
out
of a
the
stab.
drums it turns out the drums are quite hard. Like I didn't realize this. Like I picked the drums because you see people on stage and they go like, you know, big drum goes bong, little drum goes tish, you know, it all looks pretty easy. And after a while, someone said, you know that drums are really fucking difficult,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of leaning into that now. So maybe I should have tried a different instrument. I tried to learn the guitar as a kid and kind of didn't get on with it, and so I thought drums would be fun. But a lot of it is about, there's loads of studies that show that kind of learning new things, whether it's a language or an instrument or whatever. I think particularly with drums, it's really good for coordination because you're having to kind of do different things at different times. Reading music, as you know, is kind of really good for your brain. And so, trying to kind of keep 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 doing interesting things. So yeah, maybe we should have a jam at some stage.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That sounds fun. I'm curious, like I'm just kind of having a look at some of the things that you've said, and I'm curious, particularly around, so there's just a great tweet that you put out once. This is my favorite one. You said, the declining quality of the web, something like that, or the web in 2022. Figure out how to decline all the essential cookies, close the support widget asking if I need help, stop the auto-playing video, close the subscribe to our newsletter pop-up, try and remember why I came here in the first place. I mean, where is the web? That was what, 2022? So if we come forward to 2025, I'm not asking you to come up with one comparably, but do you think that's still the state of play, or do you if you were to rewrite that tweet for 2025, do you see that being a different sequence now?
I think it's very similar. So yeah, I don't think things have changed. Key banners are still annoying. People still ask you to sign up to the newsletter before you even had any content with them. You get hassled by chatbots and AI now, kind of asking you stupid questions. Do you want to, do our kind of net promoter score survey? So I haven't even used your product yet, and so it can be incredibly frustrating. And I do think, sadly, that you know the drive to create a holistic user experience has dissipated as teams get bigger and get bifurcated, and different people own different parts of the journey. And so, of course, marketing are going to subscribe you to the newsletter. Of course, the sales team are going to want to show you the latest, Black Friday promotion. Of course, the analytics team are going to want to get your feedback on X, Y, Z. And so the experience often is like, wading through a slew of pop-ups.
Well,
Now,
you had said recently that the starting point is changing. I thought that was really astute. That the starting point, and I think you actually put on LinkedIn just before this how you don't drift on the web anymore, and that more you're going to ChatGPT and AI and stuff. And the start and now that I think you wrote an article about saying how the starting point is the new battleground. And we talked earlier about the battleground of the browsers, and now it's battleground of the starting point. Because I was thinking, in light of that that tweet, like I can imagine soon the starting point being something, some prompt kind of tanglement.
Well, the article was about actually the starting point being browsers again, but I guess it's the new browser war. It used to be the case that there were dozens of browsers, and then Google effectively became dominant. And one of the reasons Google wanted to become dominant is because they wanted to integrate like Google search into the browser, into the browser bar, into the launch page. And so now most people don't start on a homepage or their website or a news site. Most people go straight to Google and start searching. So we've moved from kind of surfing to searching behavior. Like, people don't web surf anymore. They type a query, they find the result, they get the information they need, they type another query, and Google's owned that. And Google's owned it for the last kind of 10 years. Now that's great if there's a single search company and the other search companies are struggling. But we've got a new paradigm, which is AI. Now you go to Claude, you go to ChatGPT, you go to Anthropic or whatever, and now you ask a question, and you're not expecting to be sent to a website to find the answer. You're given the answer, or if not even a question, it's kind of an interaction. And so, if you're an AI company, then you want your chatbot to be the first thing that you come to when you hit the web. You want it to be the new URL bar, the new Google search bar, the new integrated search bar. And so, of course, all of these AI companies are going to start, and they already are, starting to create their own browsers. And I do think that in the next couple of years, there will be a new race to own that browser and own where you start your journey. And now, I know you were wanting to interrupt, but really quickly, part of this is because what we just described, which is why you're kind of talking about it. If the surfing experience is fundamentally frustrating, why have to navigate through all of it? You know, people talk about AI slop, which I don't think is really fair. A lot of website is slop. A lot of web, this is slop basically. Like I go to a website, decline, 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 can't find
Cognitive
anything I was looking
drag,
for.
right?
Yeah, it's really, really bad. And so, of course, if I could go to a single input box and I could ask the information that I want to, and rather than having to spend half an hour searching for it and maybe not finding it, I get back an answer that feels like it's probably correct. And I use that term very specifically because it might not be, but it might feel to you like
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
does. Um, and why have to go through a whole bunch of awful websites if I could just ask my AI agent to go and shop for me? And so I do think, sadly, that at some stage, a lot of shopping sites will effectively, and a lot of news sites will be an API for chat bots to kind of consume that information. And we won't want to go. It's the same as the high street. Like, a lot of people don't go into the high street anymore because it's just a sea of mediocre kind of chain brands. And so why go to the high street? I think the web being the high street is
Oh,
um the new sort of model, and people won't want to go there. They'll just interact with the web as an API of data through their chatbot.
and as a user, um, yes, you're making absolute sense. As a designer, you're making me feel scared. Because I'm just like, where is design in this? Are we just designing for APIs? Like, is
I
that?
mean, I honestly wouldn't worry because you'll be out of a job in 5 years' time anyway. So I don't think you need to worry
You're
about
right.
this.
Do you
Design
think
is an
so?
industry.
Do you think
I think so.
we're all done?
Well, okay. I I don't think you're done, but I think the generation below you probably are. Like the model I use, and again, I've written about this. You know, there was a time 200 years ago where if you wanted to buy a chair for your house, you'd have to go to a local carpenter, and they would make you a chair. In 2 months' time, and you'd get the chair, and it would be lovely, but it would be costing like 3 months' worth of salary because everything was bespoke. In the same way as 20 years ago, if you wanted a website, you'd go to a local web designer, and 3 months later they would build you from scratch using HTML and CSS and MySQL and PHP and whatever, a website that met your needs. Um, Jump forward from the 1800s to the 1960s, you got Comran and you've got IKEA. Now you don't need to go and have a chair designed and built for you. You have a small number of designers that will design chairs for tens of thousands of people. And so now the number of furniture designers in any town is minuscule. There would have been hundreds and hundreds of them, and now there's a few. There are still a few high-end ones. If you've got a ton of money, you want an amazing cabinet maker to make you a
Yeah,
bespoke chair for 10,000,
yeah,
20,000 pounds, you can definitely find that. But there's no kind of like street. If you go to Asia, like there'll be street carpenters making sort of cheap chairs, like pushing them out, kind of like you don't see that in the UK and most sort of developed countries. I think the same is true of design. Like I think design has gone from an artisanal kind of on-demand service to being a manufacturing line
yeah,
whereby you create a design system, and there will always be a need for designers, or not always, but there will continue for a while to be a need for a few designers to manage a company's design system if you're thinking a large company. Now, if you've got the design system set, at the moment, what do you need designers for? We don't need the designers to do the design system. Designers aren't now really building big interaction flows because it might be a team of 10 or 20, 10 or 20 product team. And so you're designing a small little thing. And mostly what you're doing is you're iterating on what's already in existence. And so the reason that we still need designers to this day is because the tool that we deliver our design systems in to our engineers is Figma. And Figma still requires a bit of technical knowledge. And most engineers don't know how to use Figma and don't want to know. Most product managers don't know how to use Figma and don't want to know. So we basically, most design these days is as Figma operators, which is depressing. A product manager writes a PRD, they hand it to like a drafts person who then mocks that up in Figma and then hands it to the engineers and they ship it. So there's very little design involved in the designer's
Yeah.
life. Now, as soon as you have a tool that doesn't have the same learning requirements that Figma does, that can pull in an existing design system and an existing code base, arguably, and allow a non-technical, non-design product manager to move things around on a screen in a way that doesn't break the layout, that doesn't break the rules, that doesn't require fine-grained typography
Yeah.
control,
Yeah.
then I would say that a very, very large number of designers will suddenly find themselves out of work.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing this. I think we reached peak designer in 2020. I think 2020, 2021, there was a massive hiring boom and it was really hard to find designers. I think now a lot of people I talk to, sadly, like are struggling. A lot of people who would have got a job immediately, they would have been fired on a Friday and had a job on a Monday, are now taking 6 months or a year to find their next job. I'm meeting a lot of designers who are maybe a little bit older who are pivoting careers. Maybe they're going to product management. Maybe they're starting their own startup. Or maybe they're opening a bike shop or a coffee shop or a vegan, cake shop or whatever. Like, I think we've reached peak designer. Now, I'm not saying designers will never be used,
Mm.
but I'm saying that the volume that was needed, in the same way as the volume that was needed for chair makers, will no longer be the same. And there will always be designers, there'll always be high end, there'll always be bespoke, there'll always be big companies needing some of those skills. But the volume will get less and less as the tools get more and more sophisticated. And so I do think, this is one of the reasons why over the summer, I ran a 6-week course for people who were designers that wanted to become founders.
Founders, yeah.
Because I think, a lot of designers who are finding that actually the work isn't satisfying anymore because they're just writing PRDs, they want to start their own thing. And so there's opportunities. I think there's more entrepreneurship opportunities if you want to pivot into startups. Why become a VC? There's opportunities to move into products, to be more kind of political. But I think design as we know it is definitely shrinking.
Yeah, I think what comes to mind, it that pivoting or that realization moments, if you call it, that you have had, where you have had various moments in your career where you looked at the scene, taken a step back, and thought, right, I'm not going through the front door over there. I'm going over here, And it sort of seems like that's almost what everyone needs to figure out how to do right now. Is to
And I
work
think,
out,
unfortunately, I
this
think
is the
it's
lay of
about
the
AI.
land. Where do
I mean,
you want to be in that? Do you want to be do you want to be with this tidal wave getting like pushed in, or do you want to sort of navigate to a higher ground or something like that? That's how I kind of imagine it.
well, this is it. Like, I started using Flash when most websites were really boring because I thought there was a great opportunity for creativity. I started using web standards when I started realizing that Flash was terrible for accessibility and kind of um, was not universally accepted. I got into UX so there's been lots of those kind of like S curves. I think the kind of S curve is basically designers being able to use AI. Now, this is really, really triggering for a lot of people because a lot of designers understandably have ethical objections around how AI is trained. It's trained on a lot of data that wasn't uh, uh, authorized. It was maybe trained on
Incentives,
scraping your
yeah,
website.
yeah,
It was trained on, first of all stealing books and then buying, secondhand books for 5p and scanning them in. And so there are a lot of moral issues around AI. Also, as we talked before, like AI is really great at giving answers which sound reasonable. The weird thing is like my AI is terrible at answering anything about a topic I know about. And it's brilliant about answering topics I know nothing about. And I think that's true for everybody,
yeah, yeah,
and so there's risk there. So I get why designers are really nervous and maybe a bit apprehensive. But at the same time, you know, I'm seeing designers who are using AI tools to supercharge their workflow, who are now
Yeah.
able, to build working functional prototypes where they never could before, where they had to get permission from the engineering team, they had to wait
Yeah.
weeks and
Yeah.
weeks and weeks. Now they
Yeah.
can do stuff really, really quickly. And so I do think there is a whole new generation of designers who I'm meeting who are leaning heavily into AI as a creative tool. And those people are really, really in demand. And I do think there's an old school of people, in the same way as the old school of people that would say, tables are only going to be the way that we're ever going to make websites, and this newfound CSS thing is never going to work.
Yeah.
Or we're always going to design in Photoshop and we're never going to kind of do UX. Like, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to be left behind. Now, that group of people that are left behind, they're not going to be out of work in the next 2 or 3 years. They're still going to be working government. They're still going to be working university. They're still going to be working in energy retailers. But that set of skills, the value that companies place on that will slowly diminish. And so,
Right.
I think if you're in your 40s, you will be able to find companies until you're 50 or 55 that will value those skills as they become more in decline. But I
Yeah.
think if you're a 20-year-old, I think you kind of have to lean into these new technologies, even if you feel a little bit kind of awkward about them, or come to the realization if you don't, you might wake up one day when the opportunities for you are limited because that has become the new shiny, exciting thing and everyone's moving in that direction.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I can resonate with a lot of that. I mean, I was thinking, in my situation, I was working in a startup, and I felt like I was an obstacle to the founder. Really, like
Yeah.
I was doing Mr. UX stuff. Well, we should probably, it's not a good experience, and I could see it in his eyes. He's thinking, ideally, you weren't here, and I could just do it myself, and I would just make that's how we do the journey,
Yeah.
and he had to
Yeah.
work through me, and I could see it, like, and I was thinking, like, the gap between his desire and it being a realization is getting thinner and thinner, and so me as a role is getting squeezed. I definitely felt that, and then I
Yeah.
also related to in me as a practitioner. In the last 3 jobs, I've done things that I'd never be able to do normally. I mean, I've just built a
Mm.
reops tool for Gov, using Power Automate and using AI to write loads of scripts and expressions, which would be beyond what I could do, but I was able to do it. So now they have a reops tool, and that, like, as a UX person, like, what? Who am I? Like, I'm making like automated flows and apps and stuff, as well as also doing a bit of service design. And I feel like I'm having a little bit of an identity crisis, but enjoying some of it too. But I'm kind of like doing lots of weird things. And, I was actually having a chat with the agency I'm working at, and I said to them, they're really happy with what I'm doing, and they like that I'm doing all this generalist stuff. And I said to them, but if I had come in through the front door telling you that that's what I do, you'd never have hired
Mm.
me. What you want
Mm.
is a service designer, and it turns out I'm in this gig that they need someone that can do all these things, like use AI to make apps and
Yep.
all
Yep.
these other things. But I feel like the market almost doesn't. I keep having this saying, like, the market doesn't like generalists. I keep having this saying because they keep looking for user researcher, or not so much anymore, but service designer,
Mm.
product designer. And people like me, we're kind of like, a little bit, well, generalist, T-shaped. And I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
there's
know.
a
I mean,
name
I
for
think a
us.
lot.
You
I
know,
actually think a lot. I think most product designers are generalists.
yeah,
I
who are
just
good at
think,
Figma,
yeah,
very good at
yeah.
Figma.
But I think you have a broad toolkit of tools to draw upon. But I do think the challenge is that, like, former UXy type people like me and you, like, the way that we like to practice UX, the way we like to think deeply about problems, the way we like to plan things out, I think are still incredibly useful. I think they're particularly useful if you are in a large company that has a lot of customers, where launching a new product could be really negatively impactful to your company. I think then having this sort of cautious, full approach is still very, very valid. But, having been in the startup world for the last 5 years, most founders value speed over accuracy. They don't mind if the thing that they launch isn't as well considered as it could have been, because they have 5 customers rather than 5 million.
And the
And actually,
cost
I
of
think as a
development's
designer,
gone down, so it doesn't
yeah,
cost as much to get it wrong.
yeah, exactly. And so the, for a designer working in that space, it can be really frustrating. You have to kind of unlearn a lot of the things you've learned. In fact,
Exactly.
one of my current talks is all about that. Bridging the gap, bridging the divide, is all about how a lot of the things we are taught as an industry in university, through the books we've read, through the talks we've seen, maybe don't have the same relevance or impact anymore. And we need to kind of reassess whether our deep held beliefs around what design is and how it should work are maybe now holding us back rather than sort of pushing us forward. And yeah, it's that ability to constantly reinvent yourself, which I think is fascinating.
The values and principles are moving, aren't they? That's like this whole thing of voice of the customer and user experience and all of that. Like the ground is shifting a little bit, and I don't think it quite knows. It hasn't finished moving. It's in flux, and it's a little hard to see where it is.
True. But that
I
also,
just,
I mean, sorry, but for somebody that likes certainty in their world, that can be
yeah,
incredibly anxiety inducing.
yeah,
And actually, like a lot of the coaching I do is around people that are feeling this anxiety around the shifting sands and don't quite know where they're heading, don't quite know where they need to put investment and time. And so I kind of get that. But at the same time, we talked a lot in the earlier parts of this around being comfortable with that anxiety, being comfortable with not knowing. I think one of the great things about being a good designer is actually being happy in a level of uncertainty, knowing that your skills and your resources have always been able to get you out of that process at some stage. And so trusting in
mm,
the process and trusting in yourself. And so a big part of that coaching mindset is to get people to realize that this has always been the case. Things have always shifted. If you were somebody, like I said, that invested all of their career in Flash and Flash disappeared, that was going to feel like an existential threat. But if you
yeah.
saw it coming and started weaving around, like, and so, you know, um, I think there's a lot that we can learn around like how um like so this is going to sound a little bit. I know this is stuff you're interested in, but when I was a kid, I was always interested in kind of Taoism. I'm not religious, but my brother had a bunch of books around Taoism, and a lot of Taoism is just around accepting that which you can't affect. A lot of it is around nature. Like there's this sort of saying, like be tall as a mountain, be as flexible as a fast moving river. I'll probably mess that up, but this idea of like flexibility, this idea of being the tree that bends in the wind as more, even though it seems weaker, is more flexible than the big oak tree that snaps. There's all
Well,
these kind of sort of
the Bruce Lee, what is it? Water in the cup. Be the water. I think he says, and it's
yes,
all about
yes,
flowing it like the water just takes any shape of the
yeah,
cup, and it's like be the
yeah.
water.
So I think there's something truth around that. I think in order to live a happy life, I think if you're inflexible and the world changes around you and you're shouting fists at the world going, this is
Yeah,
unfair, why has the world changed? You're going to be really unhappy. But if you realize that change is a constant and actually change is an opportunity and understand that that it is like water, it is constantly flowing, you can't step in the same river twice, crossing the river by feeling the stones under your feet, all of that kind of sort of maybe slightly hokey kind of Eastern mysticism. But there's something around having that attitude that I think has really, really helped me throughout my career and probably helped you. And so this is why I think maybe I have this sort of slightly more relaxed, sanguine view, because I guess it's it's stuff that I read as a kid and has kind of like stayed with me sort of culturally or character wise, I guess.
it's served you well, hasn't it? I can see that. Andy, I think that's a really good point for us to end on. I mean, I think that really, I wanted to sort of look to the future, and I started this podcast because of the uncertainty and because of it's hard to feel the ground at the moment, and I feel like that reflection is good food for thought. So thank you.
Brilliant. Been a
Yeah,
pleasure.
yeah. Thank you very much, Andy. Cheers.
Talk soon.